This is the traditional healer's hut, or in Maya it would be called Hemen Na, house of the traditional healer or house of the shaman. I built this to show people what it would look like, what it might have looked like as long ago as about 5,000 years if you were to build a house from all the materials in the rainforest, some of which we have seen on the Rainforest Medicine Trail. This house was about 6 weeks to build with 6 men, which also would have been the traditional method. Men would help each other. Families aid and assist each other in the village to build a house. So instead of one man taking 1 year to build a house like this, 6 men take 6 weeks. The roof is made up of palm leaves. These are called bay leaf palm. They're actually quite wide. When they're green, they could be 6 feet wide and could be as tall as 6 to 8 feet high. Then they are cut from the tree and then set aside to dry, and then they're separated in two, and each of the leaves goes in under and around one of these cross poles. Now this type of a thatch roof will last about 40, maybe even 50 years, depending on how well it's cared for. And you note that the roof is tied with vines. It's considered superior construction in the bush or the jungle to make a palm leaf roof with vines, because in a high wind, if you were to use nails, the nails come out of the wood like a knife out of butter. And then, of course, you lose the roof. In this case, if a hurricane were to come, you would lose all the leaves, but you would always still maintain the roof structure, so that then you would only have to replace the leaves. Here's the vine that holds the cross beams just under the roof. And you see how it's tied and holds all those pieces together. This is the vine that holds the glassy wood trunks together to make the wall. This is a piece of chicle, the zapadilla tree, one of the hardest wood species in the tropics. And as you see, it's hand-hewn. It's actually not from a lumber mill. It's chipped out with a machete and then kind of smoothed out with an adze. The walls are made of a small bush tree called glassy wood. And you notice that they also are tied with vines. Now the palm leaves, the wood for the walls, and the vines that tie the roof and the walls all have to be cut at a certain phase of the moon. The phase of the moon depends on the sap of the tree. The full moon draws the sap up. So if the sap is sweet, you don't want the sap in the tree when you cut it, because then it attracts termites and other insects. If the sap is bitter and toxic, then you cut trees on the full moon, because then the sap is in the tree and it's bitter and toxic, so it deters animals from infesting the wood. So the leaves are cut at the full moon. Some of these other pieces might be cut on the new moon or the waning moon when the sap would be down. The vines are always cut on full moon. If you don't cut the vines on the full moon, within a matter of 3 months they're actually all powder. And the same with all of these wooden pieces for the wall. They would actually be turned into powder in about 6 months. This house is already almost 15 years old. So we're about halfway through its life expectancy. The furniture is made of a wood called mahawa, and it splits like you think of making shakes in the north with an axe or a machete. None of this wood came from a lumber mill. It was all hand-hewn. So the mahawa strips off of the trunk here, 4 of them together, are tied up with vines to make a table. This is the mahawa table. You see it's tied up with vines. The vines are attached to a fork stick. It holds it together. And the bench is made of the same wood, also attached by a fork stick. This is the grinding stone. This is the metate. This is called the metlapil. The metate actually came from a local ruin. And the metlapil, the grinding stone, we found on the close by the river when we made the steps. So if you were a Maya lady and you were, for instance, had just harvested your chocolate seeds, here you would roast the chocolate. You had dried the seeds, you'd roast the chocolate, there your fire would be under here. Once the chocolate seeds were nicely roasted, you would transfer them to the metate, and then you would grind. You would also grind your corn here to make tortillas. And here is the comal, a clay disc for cooking, baking tortillas. The same fire heats this clay pot where maybe you might make hot chocolate or coffee or beans. The dishware is all made of clay. It's a little plate and a cup. This is an interesting piece. This is how they would make a hot plate, a floor mat. They might even make wall mats for this in order to keep a bit more of the rain and the weather out. This is the bark of the tree that makes the furniture, the mahawa bark. Now interesting because you see that the bark is braided. Now this bark is said to be anti-parasitic, that there's something in the bark that deters all insects. Now this little piece of woven mat, again, is about 15 years old. So we know clearly from this demonstration that the bark resists moisture and that it is probably quite toxic because no other insect, no ant, nothing has eaten it. It's just about the same as it was 15 years ago, which for a natural raw material in the jungle is really quite phenomenal. And here is the sink. The sink is actually made of mahogany. This sink is probably about 75 years old. This is what people would have used for washing clothing, to wash their dishes. Generally, there would be a small pipe that would end up in a bucket to collect the water, and you would have to take the water out of the bucket and empty it outside every day. This was my kitchen sink for 10 years. This is a clay pot, which is here to store drinking water. Now this clay pot is made in such a way that the glaze is not completely sealed, so that the water seeps through just a little bit. So it's often moist and dripping so that as the air blows over it, it acts like an air conditioning unit that keeps the water cool. Then you would have your little cup, you dip inside, take a drink of water. Often they have the cup on a little string and it hangs right there on this forked stick that is also a tree trunk. And over here is the second room. Now, a healer's hut like this might be the personal residence of the Hemen or the traditional healer. It might also be reserved exclusively for the use of his patients. It would be like a hospital. That's where people would eat, in the kitchen, and here is where people would sleep. This bed is made of the same leaves from which the roof is made, the same palm leaf. It's made this way, first of all, because it's soft, comfortable, and cool. Secondly, the purpose of a bed like this is to be able to do a steam bath or a pouring hot water bath for a patient. Supposing a patient has a very severe musculoskeletal condition like rheumatism, or it might even be temporary paralysis or a severe backache. Don Eligio might have laid a person down on a bed like this, boiled a pot of herbs on the fogon, the clay stove, carried that boiling pot of herbs from the stove. So the pot would be placed under the bed, the herbs were boiled in there, and then the steam would rise up. The patient would lie down on this palm thatch bed and receive the benefit of the medicinal plants in steam vapor. They would be covered with a wool blanket and allowed to sweat. Then, of course, they would be covered and cared for after that, because in the tropics, it's very important that people getting steam baths aren't allowed in the vientos or the drafts or the aires, which then makes the condition worse. So the bed, sometimes there would be a hammock right here that might have been made of hemp material. The walls, as you see, are quite open. Actually, if a person lived here, they might cover the walls with cardboard boxes sometimes. In ancient days, they would have filled in these spaces with adobe, That would be a mixture of clay and water and dry horse or cow dung, as a matter of fact. The dry dung has little bits of straw in it, and that helps the clay meld together like a network. So the straw from the dung, the clay, and the water form almost like a natural cement that seals up the walls.